The smell of perfectly grilled ribeye steaks wafted through Margaret Donnelly's pristine dining room as I sat at the mahogany table, staring at the empty space in front of me where my plate should have been. Around the table, my husband's entire family, all 12 of them, were cutting into thick, juicy steaks accompanied by roasted vegetables, creamy mashed potatoes, and warm dinner rolls that glistened with butter. Everyone except me. "Oh my," Margaret said with theatrical concern, pressing her manicured hand to her chest as she noticed my empty place setting. "I'm so sorry, dear. I must have miscounted when I was at the butcher. There just weren't enough steaks." She smiled that saccharine smile I'd come to know so well over the past 3 years. "But don't worry, I'm sure there's some leftover salad in the refrigerator from lunch." My husband David looked up from his perfectly cooked medium-rare steak, his face flushing slightly. "Mom, that's not— It's fine," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. "I'm not that hungry anyway." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. This wasn't the first time Margaret had forgotten to include me in family meal preparations. Last month at David's birthday dinner, everyone received homemade chocolate cake except me. Apparently, there had been a baking mishap with the last slice. At Easter, the family feast featured a beautiful honey-glazed ham, roasted turkey, and all the traditional sides, while I was offered a peanut butter sandwich because Margaret had assumed I was on some kind of diet. Each incident was accompanied by the same wide-eyed innocence, the same profuse apologies, the same suggestions that maybe I could find something in the kitchen to tide me over. And each time, David's family sat in uncomfortable silence while I smiled and pretended it didn't matter. But tonight was different. Tonight, as I watched Margaret serve generous slices of her famous triple chocolate cake to everyone at the table, pausing deliberately when she reached my chair before moving on with an apologetic shrug, something inside me finally snapped. "You know what?" I said, standing up from the table with as much dignity as I could muster. "I think I'll head home early tonight. I have some work to catch up on." David started to protest, but I was already gathering my purse and jacket. "Enjoy your dinner, everyone. Margaret, thank you for hosting." I drove home to our apartment in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel as 3 years of accumulated humiliation crystallized into something harder and more focused. Margaret Donnelly wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd made one critical error in judgment. She'd forgotten that I wasn't just David's wife. I was also the senior food critic for Metropolitan Dining magazine, with a column read by over 200,000 people in the city. More importantly, I had connections throughout the restaurant industry that Margaret could never imagine. And Margaret was incredibly proud of her catering business, Elegant Affairs by Margaret, which she'd built over the past 15 years into one of the city's most sought-after services for high-end events. She catered charity galas, corporate functions, and society weddings. Her client list read like a who's who of the city's elite, and she never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about her culinary expertise and impeccable standards. What Margaret didn't know was that I'd been quietly documenting every slight, every oversight, every moment of deliberate exclusion for the past 2 years. Not out of spite initially, but out of a growing need to validate my own experiences. David had a tendency to minimize his mother's behavior, suggesting I was being too sensitive or reading too much into things. But you don't accidentally forget to buy enough food for a dinner party you've been planning for weeks. You don't consistently run out of dessert just when it's time to serve the daughter-in-law you've never approved of. And you certainly don't develop selective amnesia every time there's a family gathering. I spent the weekend researching Margaret's business more thoroughly than I'd ever researched a restaurant review. Elegant Affairs by Margaret had built its reputation on exclusivity and attention to detail. Margaret marketed herself as someone who could handle the most demanding clients with grace and precision. Her website featured testimonials from satisfied customers, praising her ability to accommodate dietary restrictions, her creative menu planning, and her commitment to ensuring every guest felt special. The irony was almost too perfect. I also discovered that Margaret was bidding on the catering contract for the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala, a massive charity event that raised over $500,000 for children's literacy programs. The gala was scheduled for next month, and landing the contract would be the biggest coup of Margaret's career. The foundation's board included several prominent business leaders and philanthropists whose endorsement could elevate Elegant Affairs by Margaret to the next level. More importantly, I knew 3 of the board members personally through my work at the magazine. We'd developed good professional relationships over the years, and they often asked for my recommendations on restaurants and catering services for their events. Monday morning, I called Patricia Whitmore, the foundation's president and the namesake of her late husband's charitable organization. "Rebecca," Patricia's warm voice came through the phone. "How lovely to hear from you. I was just reading your review of that new farm-to-table place downtown. Brilliant as always." "Thank you, Patricia. Actually, I'm calling because I heard through the grapevine that you're looking for a caterer for this year's gala." "We are indeed. The selection process has been quite competitive. We want to make sure we choose someone who really understands our mission and can create an event that reflects our values." "Well, I might have some insights that could be helpful. You know how much I value integrity and consistency in food service." We talked for 20 minutes. I didn't mention Margaret by name, but I did share some general thoughts about the importance of caterers who treat all guests with equal care and attention. I mentioned how disappointed I'd been recently to hear stories about service providers who played favorites or made certain guests feel unwelcome. "That's exactly what we're trying to avoid," Patricia said. "The gala is about bringing people together, creating an inclusive atmosphere where everyone feels valued. We can't have a caterer who doesn't embody those principles." "Absolutely. And speaking of inclusivity, I've been thinking about doing a feature on catering services for our holiday issue. You know, highlighting companies that go above and beyond to accommodate all their clients' needs. Would you mind if I reached out to some of the caterers you're considering? Just for background research, of course." Patricia was delighted by the idea and promised to send me the list of potential vendors. Margaret's name was third on the list. That afternoon, I called Margaret directly. "Rebecca." She sounded genuinely surprised to hear from me. "How unexpected. Is everything all right with David?" "David's fine. Actually, I'm calling in my professional capacity. I'm working on a feature about local catering services, and your name came up as one of the city's premier providers." The change in her tone was immediate. Gone was the barely concealed condescension I was used to hearing. This was Margaret in full business mode, charming, professional, eager to please. "Well, that's wonderful. I'd be delighted to speak with you about Elegant Affairs by Margaret. As you know, we pride ourselves on exceptional service and attention to detail." "Excellent. I'd love to schedule a time to observe one of your events, get a sense of your operation in action. I believe in reviewing services the same way I review restaurants, experiencing them firsthand." We arranged for me to attend a corporate luncheon she was catering the following Thursday. A pharmaceutical company was hosting their quarterly board meeting, and Margaret was providing a full-service lunch for 30 executives. I arrived at the office building dressed professionally, with my press credentials clearly visible and my notebook ready. Margaret greeted me with a level of warmth and enthusiasm I'd never experienced as her daughter-in-law. "Rebecca, thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to show you what Elegant Affairs by Margaret can do." The event was flawlessly executed, I had to admit. The presentation was elegant, the food was excellent, and Margaret moved through the room with practiced grace, ensuring every detail was perfect. She checked on guests, accommodated, last-minute dietary requests, and handled a minor crisis when one of the servers accidentally spilled wine on a client's jacket. But I wasn't there to review her professional competence. I was there to understand her character. "You really do think of everything," I commented as we watched her staff clean up after the event. "I imagine you never have situations where guests feel left out or forgotten." "Oh, never," Margaret said emphatically. "That would be my worst nightmare. Every guest is important, whether they're the CEO or the newest intern. That's what sets us apart from other caterers. We make sure everyone feels special." "That must be challenging sometimes. I'm sure you've had situations where personalities clash or family dynamics get complicated." Margaret laughed. "You know how it is with families. Sometimes people can be difficult, but professionally, I never let personal feelings interfere with service. That would be completely unprofessional." I nodded thoughtfully, making notes. "So, if you were catering an event and there was someone there you didn't particularly like, maybe they'd married into a family you were serving, you'd still treat them with the same level of care as everyone else?" "Absolutely. In fact, I'd probably go out of my way to make sure they felt welcome. You can't let personal biases affect your professional standards." "Perfect." I spent the next 2 weeks conducting similar research with 5 other catering companies, building a comprehensive picture of industry standards and best practices. I interviewed event planners about their experiences with different caterers, focusing particularly on how they handled challenging situations and difficult client dynamics. The story was writing itself, but I wasn't ready to publish anything yet. First, I wanted to give Margaret one more opportunity to demonstrate her professional principles in a more personal setting. David's cousin Emma was getting engaged, and the family was planning a celebration dinner at Margaret's house the following Saturday. When David mentioned it to me, I saw my opportunity. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "Should I bring anything?" David looked uncomfortable. "Well, Mom said she has everything covered. She's been planning this for weeks." "I'm sure she has. But maybe I could contribute something small? I know how much work it is to host these family gatherings." I called Margaret directly. "Oh, Rebecca!" The professional warmth was back in her voice. "David told me you wanted to contribute something to Emma's celebration. That's so thoughtful of you." "I was thinking maybe I could bring a dessert. I know how much the family loves your baking, but I thought it might be nice to have some variety." "That's very generous, but honestly, I have the whole menu planned. I'm making my signature chocolate cake. You know how the family feels about tradition." "Of course, well, maybe I could help with setup or serving." "Oh no, dear. You're a guest. Just relax and enjoy yourself." Saturday arrived, and I showed up to Margaret's house with a small gift for Emma and a bottle of wine for the table. The dining room was set beautifully for 8 people, the immediate family plus Emma's fiancé. Margaret had prepared a feast: roasted chicken with herbs, wild rice pilaf, green beans with almonds, fresh bread, and a stunning chocolate cake for dessert. Once again, there was no place setting for me. "Oh," Margaret exclaimed, as if suddenly noticing my presence. "I didn't realize you were coming. David must have forgotten to mention it. Let me see if I can find another chair." David's face went pale. "Mom, I told you Rebecca was coming. We talked about it on Tuesday." "Did we? I'm so sorry, I must have gotten confused. You know how hectic things have been with the business." She bustled around, eventually finding a folding chair from the basement and setting it at the corner of the table. There wasn't enough food for an additional person, of course. Once again, I was offered the leftover salad solution, but this time, I was prepared. "You know what, Margaret?" I said, pulling out my phone. "This is actually perfect timing. I've been working on that article about catering services, and I'd love to get some photos of your presentation. Do you mind if I document the evening?" Margaret beamed. "Of course. I'm always happy to showcase my work." I took careful photos of the beautiful table setting, the perfectly plated meals, the family enjoying their dinner. And I took several photos of my folding chair at the corner of the table, with its conspicuous lack of food. "This is such great material," I said, still snapping pictures. "The contrast between your professional standards and your personal approach is really fascinating." Margaret's smile flickered slightly, but she didn't seem to fully grasp the implication. After dinner, as the family moved to the living room for coffee and cake, I excused myself to the bathroom and called Patricia Whitmore. "Patricia, it's Rebecca. I hope I'm not calling too late, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation about catering services." "Not at all. Have you had a chance to research any of the companies on our list?" "I have, actually. And I've discovered some concerning information about one of the caterers you're considering. I think we should talk." The article ran in Metropolitan Dining magazine 2 weeks later. The headline read, "When Professional Standards Don't Apply, a Personal Investigation into Catering Industry Ethics." I didn't mention Margaret by name in the article itself, but I didn't need to. The piece detailed my experiences with a local caterer who maintained impeccable professional standards for paying clients, while consistently excluding and humiliating family members at personal gatherings. I included photos from the engagement dinner, with faces blurred for privacy, but the empty place setting clearly visible. The article discussed the importance of integrity in service industries, arguing that a provider's true character is revealed not in how they treat their most important clients, but in how they treat the people they think don't matter. I quoted several industry experts about the connection between personal ethics and professional reliability. But the real impact came from the social media response. The article was shared thousands of times, with readers sharing their own stories of exclusion and discrimination in family and social settings. The hashtag #empty plate challenge began trending, with people posting photos of times they'd been deliberately excluded from meals or gatherings. Margaret's business phone started ringing within hours of the article's publication. Not with new bookings, but with cancellations. 3 corporate clients pulled their contracts, citing concerns about the company's values alignment. 2 society weddings were rescheduled with different caterers. Most devastatingly, the Whitmore Foundation announced they were selecting a different catering service for their gala. One that better reflects our commitment to inclusivity and respect for all individuals. David called me that evening, his voice tight with anger. "Rebecca, what the hell have you done? Mom's business is in free fall. She's lost 6 contracts just today." "I wrote a truthful article about my experiences with a local caterer," I said calmly. "I never used her name. Everyone knows it's about her. The photos, the details. It's obviously our family dinners." Then maybe she should have thought about that before she decided to make those dinners into public humiliation sessions. "She's my mother. And I'm your wife. For 3 years, I've watched her deliberately exclude me, embarrass me, and treat me like I'm not worthy of basic human decency. And for 3 years, you've stood by and let it happen." The silence stretched between us, filled with all the conversations we should have had years ago. "She didn't mean it that way," David said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "David, she told me herself that she would never let personal feelings interfere with professional service. She said she'd go out of her way to make sure everyone felt welcome, even people she didn't like. Those were her exact words. But apparently, that professional standard doesn't apply to family." "So you decided to destroy her business?" "I decided to hold her accountable for her actions. I decided to stop pretending that systematic exclusion and deliberate humiliation are acceptable just because they come with an apology and a suggestion to check the refrigerator." Margaret called me the next day. Gone was any pretense of warmth or professionalism. Her voice shook with rage. "You vindictive bitch," she hissed. "You've ruined everything I've worked for. 20 years building this business and you destroyed it with one article. I didn't destroy anything, Margaret. I just shined a light on behavior you were apparently comfortable with when you thought there would be no consequences. I never treated you badly. You served me leftover salad while everyone else got steak. You gave everyone else chocolate cake while suggesting I find something in your refrigerator. You consistently forgot to buy enough food when I was coming to family dinners. For 3 years, you made sure I knew exactly how unwelcome I was in your son's family. That was never intentional. You're being oversensitive. Margaret, you seated me in a folding chair with no food while everyone else enjoyed a beautiful dinner. You did it knowing I was documenting catering services for my magazine. If that wasn't intentional, then you're not competent enough to be running a catering business anyway. The legal threat started the following week. Margaret hired a lawyer who sent me a cease and desist letter, claiming I had defamed her business and caused intentional economic harm. The letter demanded I publish a retraction and pay damages for lost revenue. My editor at Metropolitan Dining Magazine forwarded the letter to the publication's legal team, who responded with a detailed defense of the article's accuracy and my right to report on my experiences as a consumer. They also pointed out that since I had never named Margaret's business in the article, any connection between the piece and Elegant Affairs by Margaret had been made by readers drawing their own conclusions. The story gained even more attention when a local television news program picked it up, framing it as a broader conversation about family dynamics and social exclusion. They interviewed several psychologists about the long-term effects of deliberate exclusion within families and reached out to other people who'd experienced similar treatment. Margaret's lawyer advised her to drop the legal action, warning that a lawsuit would only draw more attention to the situation and potentially expose her to discovery that could reveal additional damaging information. But the damage was already done. Elegant Affairs by Margaret officially closed 3 months after the article was published. Margaret's reputation in the catering industry was irreparable, and the loss of contracts had made the business financially unviable. She moved to Florida to live with her sister, leaving behind the city where she'd built her career and her social standing. David barely spoke to me for months, caught between loyalty to his mother and the undeniable truth of what she'd done. Our marriage survived, but it was forever changed. David had to confront the reality that his mother's behavior toward me hadn't been a series of innocent mistakes or personality clashes. It had been a deliberate campaign to make me feel unwelcome in his family, and he had enabled it by refusing to see what was happening. We went to couples therapy, where David finally acknowledged that his desire to keep peace between his mother and his wife had actually created more conflict by allowing Margaret's behavior to escalate unchecked. He realized that by minimizing my experiences and asking me to be understanding of his mother's quirks, he had essentially chosen his mother's comfort over my dignity. The therapy was painful but necessary. David had to learn to see his mother's actions through my eyes, to understand how systematic exclusion felt different from occasional oversights. I had to work through my own anger and resentment, not just toward Margaret but toward David for failing to protect me when I needed him to. A year later, David and I are in a better place, but the scars remain. We've established clear boundaries about family interactions and agreed that any future relationships with his extended family will be built on mutual respect or not at all. David has apologized to me both privately and publicly, acknowledging his role in enabling his mother's behavior. Margaret and I will never reconcile, and I'm at peace with that. She made her choices, and I made mine. The difference is that I was willing to face the consequences of my actions, while she spent 3 years believing she could humiliate me without any accountability. I don't regret writing the article. I don't regret exposing behavior that Margaret herself acknowledged was unprofessional and unacceptable. What I do regret is that it took me so long to value myself enough to demand basic respect. The empty plate at Margaret's dinner table wasn't just about food, it was about belonging, about family, about being seen as worthy of consideration. Margaret thought she could make me invisible, could reduce me to an afterthought in my husband's family. She learned that invisible people can sometimes be the ones you should fear the most. My relationship with David's extended family remains complicated. Some members have reached out to apologize for their silence during those difficult dinners, acknowledging that they knew what was happening but didn't know how to address it. Others have chosen to maintain loyalty to Margaret, viewing me as the villain who destroyed a family business over petty grievances. I understand their perspective, even if I don't agree with it. Family loyalty is powerful, and it's easier to blame the outsider than to confront the uncomfortable truth that someone you love has behaved badly. But I sleep well at night, knowing that no one will ever again think they can treat me as less than worthy of basic human dignity. The cost was high, but some principles are worth fighting for. And every time I sit down to a family dinner now, any family dinner, I make sure there's a full place setting waiting for me, with a real chair and a complete meal. It's a small thing, but it represents something larger. The knowledge that I belong at the table, and that I have the power to walk away if anyone suggests otherwise. Margaret thought she was teaching me my place in her son's family. Instead, she taught me that my place is wherever I choose to make it, and that no one has the right to make me feel small. The empty plate was hers to give, but the response was mine to choose.